Okay, we are going to be in Numbers chapter 14 this evening. We're following Israel's journey through the wilderness, and we've seen them depart from Sinai. They'd come from Egypt and headed down to Sinai, where God gave them the law and other instructions concerning the tabernacle. And now they've left Sinai and they're heading towards the land that God has promised to give them. But we've seen that so far things have not gone particularly well. The people have been complaining soon after they left Sinai. They were uh, com complaining, and God brought a fire which destroyed some of the outlying parts of the camp, and they named that place Taberah. And then the people had that craving for meat, desire to eat meat. They were fed up eating the manna and wanted some variation in their diet, and thought back to all of the good food that they used to have when they were in Egypt. And then we had Miriam and Aaron seeking to undermine the position of Moses and challenging his authority, that they consider themselves to be on equal terms with Moses, and that led to Miriam being struck with leprosy, and the journey was delayed for 7 days while she was outside of the camp and cleansed from the leprosy. And then in chapter 13 of the book of Numbers, we had the mission of the 12 spies who were sent out into the land. By this time, the people have reached Kadesh Barnea, which you can see on the map there. If you follow the red line north, you see just Kadesh Barnea there. And from there, the spies travel further north into the land and spy out the land. But 10 of the 12 produced an unfavourable report, a discouraging report, which sought to discourage the people from going any further, and thought that it would be difficult to conquer the land, that the inhabitants of the land were too strong and their cities were too well fortified. So this evening we come to the continuation of this story in Numbers chapter 14. And verses 1 to 4, we see the reaction of the people to that negative report that was brought back by the spies. So chapter 14 verses 1 to 4 says this: Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night, and all the people of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness. Why does the Lord bring us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to one another, Let us choose a captain and go back to Egypt. So we see the effect here of that negative report of the spies, telling the people that the inhabitants of the land were too strong, it's going to be too difficult. And the people then raised a loud cry and wept that night. And they complained against Moses and Aaron, expressing their wish to have died either in Egypt or there in the wilderness. And surely that would be better than whatever awaits them in the land of Canaan. They question the Lord, and why has the Lord brought them into the wilderness here to die by the sword? And they're fearful that their wives and their children will also become victims if they attempt to conquer Canaan. So they're thinking, well, it would be better if we just went back to Egypt. And so they propose choosing a new leader, someone who would take them back to Egypt. So they're ready to give up on Moses and ready to give up on everything that God has planned for them. Well, we read on here in verses 5 to the beginning of verse 10, uh, continuing with the story. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the people of Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, rent their clothes and said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, The land which we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us. a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. But all the congregation said to stone them with stones. So Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before the assembly, perhaps in an expression of their distress at what the people are proposing to do, and also in awe of how God might respond to all of this. But Joshua and Caleb, who had been amongst the spies who had gone into the land, tore their clothes in a sign of distress and grief. And they spoke to the people to try to persuade them to change their minds. Previously, as we've seen, Caleb had urged the people to go up at once and to take the land. This was Caleb's positive report that he'd brought when they came back in chapter 13, verse 30. Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it." And now he and Joshua both tried to reassure the people that the land that they had seen was exceptionally good, good land. It's a land flowing with milk and honey, so a prosperous, fruitful land. And if the Lord was pleased with them, then he would bring them into the land and he would give it to them. So they urged the people not to do this, not to rebel against the Lord. And they are not to be fearful of the people of the land. Joshua and Caleb say of them, they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them. The Hebrew word which is translated as protection here is the word for shadow, which is perhaps an appropriate picture of protection in a hot land. On a hot sunny day, people seek out some shade or a shadow to stand in. And here the inhabitants of Canaan are, in the picture here, are being left exposed as if there's no shade or no shadow to protect them from the heat of the sun. So Caleb and Joshua are confident that the Lord is with them, and so there's no reason to fear the people of the land, whatever they may look like, however tall they may be, or however strong they may appear to be. That when the Lord is on your side, then there is no need to fear the enemy. The psalmist in Psalm 3 and verse 6 says this, "I am not afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me round about. Arise, O Lord, deliver me, O my God, for thou dost smite all my enemies on the cheek. Thou dost break the teeth of the wicked." So one person plus God equals victory. And we might think of some other stories from the Old Testament where that principle holds true. David and Goliath, which on the face of it seemed to be a bit of a mismatch. But David, because God was on his side, was victorious. And then Gideon, the judge Gideon, and his conflict with the Midianites, and God instructing Midian to reduce the number of men in his army until he had just had a few hundred, and with those few hundred, was able to defeat the Midianites. So when God is on your side, then there's no need to fear the size of the opposition. However, here in this case, Joshua and Caleb had tried to give the people this encouragement, but they were rejected as the people then threatened to stone Caleb and Joshua. The beginning of verse 10 there says, "But all the congregation said to stone them with stones." They don't want to hear any more of this. Back in Exodus in chapter 17 and verse 1, on an earlier occasion of complaint from the people, they had Moses was fearful that the people were going to stone him in Exodus 17 verse 4. So Moses cried to the Lord, "What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me." Well, read on here in Numbers chapter 14, second part of verse 10 and to verse 12. And we have now the appearance of the glory of the Lord coming onto the scene. Then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the people of Israel. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will this people despise me, and how long will they not believe in me, in spite of all the signs which I have wrought among them? I will strike them with the pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than they. So at this dangerous moment, the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting in the sight of the people, and the Lord spoke to Moses. How long, he asked, will the people despise him? How long will they treat him with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in him, despite all of the signs that he had worked amongst them? That would include the plagues in Egypt, the miraculous crossing of the Red Sea, the provision of water and manna in the wilderness. All of these things God has done for them, and yet they despise him. They don't believe. And because of the people's lack of faith and their trust in him, the Lord says that he will now strike them with pestilence. He will disinherit them, and instead he will make of Moses a nation that is greater and mightier than them. Well, the Lord had said something similar after the incident of the golden calf as well, in Exodus chapter 32, verses 9 and 10, when the Lord informs Moses of what the people have done in making the golden calf. He says in verse 9, the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them. But of you I will make a great nation. So there on that occasion as well, the Lord had said that he would destroy the people, and instead he would make a new nation from Moses. Well, that on that occasion, Moses had intervened and God didn't do that. And now that on this second occasion, the Lord is saying something similar once again, that his intention is to destroy the people of Israel and use Moses, from Moses, produce a nation that would be greater and mightier than Israel. So just a few months have passed since that golden calf incident, and the people are still rebelling against the Lord. Well, verses 13 to 19, we read on here. But Moses said to the Lord, then the Egyptians will hear of it, for thou didst bring up this people in thy might from among them, and they will tell the inhabitants of this land. They have heard that thou, O Lord, art in the midst of this people. For thou, O Lord, art seen face to face, and thy cloud stands over them, and thou goest before them in a pillar of cloud by day and in a pillar of fire by night. Now if thou dost kill this people as one man, then the nations who have heard thy fame will say, because the Lord was not able to bring this people into the land which he swore to give them, therefore he has slain them in the wilderness. And now I pray thee, let the power of the Lord be great as thou hast promised, saying, the Lord is slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, forgiving iniquity and transgression, but he will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of fathers upon children, upon the third and upon the fourth generation. Pardon the iniquity of this people, I pray thee, according to the greatness of thy steadfast love, and according as thou hast forgiven this people from Egypt even until now. So Moses once again intercedes on behalf of the people. He prays to God for the people. And he begins here by using the same argument that he had used earlier after the golden calf incident in Exodus chapter 32, verses 11 and 12. Where he said, but Moses besought the Lord his God and said, O Lord, why dost thy wrath burn hot against thy people, whom thou hast brought forth out of the land of Egypt, with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent did he bring them forth, to slay them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth? Moses using the same argument again here. The Egyptians know that the Lord brought the people of Israel out of Egypt, and they know that his presence is with them in the form of the pillar of cloud and fire. And now if the Lord kills the people of Israel, then the Egyptians will think that he has done so because he was not able to bring his people into the land. So Moses thinks that the Egyptians would interpret all of this as a sign of God's weakness and God's failure. He took the people out of Egypt, but he couldn't finish the job in bringing them into the promised land. So Moses wants God's reputation amongst the nations to be preserved. And then in his second argument, Moses appeals to the character of God that God has revealed to him, that he is slow to anger, he abounds in steadfast love, he forgives sins, he doesn't let the guilty off. And again, this was the how God had described himself when he passed by Moses in Exodus chapter 34, verses 6 and 7. The Lord passed by before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. So Moses makes this appeal on the basis of God's character, of what God is like. And here he prays that the Lord might pardon the iniquity of this people, according to the greatness of thy steadfast love, and according as thou hast forgiven this people from Egypt even until now. So here Moses appeals to the steadfast love of God. The Hebrew word translated as steadfast love is chesed, and it's used about 250 times in the Old Testament. And it covers really a whole range of characteristics of God. It's used of the faithfulness of God, God's loyalty, God's kindness, God's goodness, God being true to his covenant. It sort of summarizes the whole character of God, that he is a God of steadfast love. It is in God's character to keep his covenant, to keep his word. And Moses says here that God has been forgiving these people since they left Egypt, as thou hast forgiven this people from Egypt even until now. This is how God has been dealing with them. And Moses prays that God might continue to do that, that God might continue to be gracious towards this people and pardon them this time as well. Well, we see God's response to this appeal in verses 20 to 25. The text goes on to say this, Then the Lord said, I have pardoned, according to your word. But truly as I live, and as all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, none of the men who have seen my glory and my signs which I wrought in Egypt and in the wilderness, and yet have put me to the proof these 10 times, and have not hearkened to my voice, shall see the land which I swore to give to their fathers. And none of those who despised me shall see it, but my servant Caleb, because he was of a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land into which he went, and his descendants shall possess it. Now, since the Amalekites and Canaanites dwell in the valleys, turn tomorrow and set out for the wilderness by the way to the Red Sea. So the Lord here tells Moses that he has pardoned the people, just as Moses had asked him to do. But pardon does not mean that there will be no punishment or no consequences for their sin, just that it will not be what it might have been. So God will not wipe Israel out completely and start afresh with Moses. That won't happen. So they may be pardoned or forgiven, but God will ensure that none of those who had seen his glory and signs in Egypt and in the wilderness, but who have put him to the test, he says these 10 times, meaning repeatedly, none of them shall see the land. And the certainty of this happening is emphasized by God preceding his words with an oath. Truly as I live, and as all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord. This is God putting himself on oath that this will certainly happen. But the one exception, or there'll be two exceptions, the exception to this would be Caleb, he says, because he has a different spirit and has followed me fully. Caleb would be allowed to enter the land because he was a man of a different spirit. He had a different attitude to the others, and he had followed the Lord completely. And his descendants following on after him would also possess the land that would be allotted to Caleb. So the following day, then, God instructs Moses that he must lead the people into the wilderness, back towards the direction of the Red Sea, and away from the valleys which are occupied by the Amalekites and the Canaanites. So away from the land that God had promised to give them. We continue on then in verses 26 to 35, and the Lord here announces this judgment. And the Lord said to Moses and to Aaron, how long shall this wicked congregation murmur against me? I have heard the murmurings of the people of Israel, which they murmur against me. Say to them, as I live, says the Lord, what you have said in my hearing I will do to you. Your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness, and of all your number, numbered from 20 years old and upward, who have murmured against me, not one shall come into the land where I swore that I would make you dwell, except Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. But your little ones, who you said would become a prey, I will bring in, and they shall know the land which you have despised. But as for you, your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness, and your children shall be shepherds in the wilderness 40 years, and shall suffer for your faithlessness, until the last of your dead bodies lies in the wilderness. According to the number of the days in which you spied out the land 40 days, for every day a year, you shall bear your iniquity 40 years, and you shall know my displeasure. I, the Lord, have spoken. Surely this will I do to all this wicked congregation that are gathered together against me. In this wilderness they shall come to a full end, and there they shall die. So here the Lord addresses Moses and Aaron to instruct them to announce this judgment to the people. And the Lord will give the people what they had asked for. They asked for death in the wilderness. Back in chapter 14, verse 2, they had said there, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness. You want to die in the wilderness? Well, this is it. All of the people from age 20 and above who have murmured against the Lord will die in the wilderness. And that's repeated 4 times in this passage. In verse 29, your dead bodies shall fall in the wilderness. In verse 32, but as for you, your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness. Verse 33, until the last of your dead bodies lies in the wilderness. And then in verse 35, in this wilderness they shall come to a full end, and there they shall die. So none of that generation will come into the land that God had promised them, except for Caleb and Joshua. However, their little ones, their children, who they said would become a prey or victims, if they went into the land, as again, chapter 14, verse 3, this is what they had said. Why does the Lord bring us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Well, God says they won't become a prey. They will know the land. They'll go into the land and they will take possession of it. And these children will grow up in the wilderness, where they shall be working as shepherds for 40 years, suffering alongside their parents until the last of that unfaithful generation dies. And the 40 years in the wilderness will correspond to the 40 days that the spies spent in the land of Canaan, 1 year for each day of the spying mission. The people will bear their iniquity for 40 years, and they shall know the Lord's displeasure. The Lord summarizes his intention there in verse 35, again emphasizing the certainty of this happening. I, the Lord, have spoken. Surely this will I do to all this wicked congregation that are gathered together against me. In this wilderness they shall come to a full end, and there they shall die. Well, verse 36 to 38 goes on to speak of the death of the spies who'd gone into the land, and the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land, and who returned and made all the congregation to murmur against him by bringing up an evil report against the land. The men who brought up an evil report of the land died by plague before the Lord. But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh remained alive, of those men who went to spy out the land. So the spies who Moses had sent into the land and who'd brought back this evil report, this discouraging report, causing the people to murmur against Moses, they died by plague before the Lord. But once again, Joshua and Caleb are mentioned as the exceptions who would be spared because of their faith and their trust in God. So out of those 12 spies who went into the land, 10 are to die by the plague, and Joshua and Caleb would survive and they would enter the land. Well, we see the reaction of the people now when this judgment of God is conveyed to them, from verse 39 down to verse 45 to the end of the chapter. And Moses told these words to all the people of Israel, and the people mourned greatly. And they rose early in the morning and went up to the heights of the hill country, saying, See, we are here. We will go up to the place which the Lord has promised, for we have sinned. But Moses said, Why now are you transgressing the command of the Lord? For that will not succeed. Do not go up, lest you be struck down before your enemies, for the Lord is not among you. For there the Amalekites and the Canaanites are before you, and you shall fall by the sword, because you have turned back from following the Lord. The Lord will not be with you. But they presumed to go up to the heights of the hill country, although neither the ark of the covenant of the Lord nor Moses departed out of the camp. Then the Amalekites and the Canaanites who dwelt in that hill country came down and defeated them and pursued them even to Hormah. So when Moses told the people the words of the Lord and this judgment, they understood what God intended to do, and they mourned greatly, we're told. So death in the wilderness no longer seems such a desirable alternative. And in the morning they decided that they would go up to the land that God had promised after all, acknowledging that they had sinned. And they thought that doing now what they had refused to do earlier would put things right. Just say sorry and everything will be all right again. However, Moses warned them that in doing so, they would be compounding their sins by this further rebellion against God's will. They will not succeed, and they will be in danger of being struck down by their enemies because the Lord will not be among them. They will fall by the swords of the Amalekites and the Canaanites. But the people didn't listen to Moses' warning, and they went ahead. They went up to the heights of the hill country. The Ark of the Covenant and Moses himself remained in the camp, signaling that without God's blessing and God's presence, the people would fail. And just as Moses had warned them, the Amalekites and the Canaanites came out, and they defeated the Israelites, and they pursued them as far as Hormah. Hormah was on the southern border of Canaan. There's a reference to this in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verses 44 to 46, when Moses makes his one of his final speeches to the people before they do enter. This is at the end of the 40-year period where he makes this speech here, and he's recalling those events from that time. He says, "Then the Amorites who lived in that hill country came out against you and chased you as bees do, and beat you down in Seir as far as Hormah. And you returned and wept before the Lord. But the Lord did not hearken to your voice or give ear to you. So you remained at Kadesh many days, the days that you remained there." As he likens the pursuit here of the people being chased, as if they were a swarm of bees was pursuing them and chasing them away. And so we see then the failure of the people here and their continued rebellion against God and what God intended to do to them because of that they would not enter the land. That whole generation would die in the wilderness, and they would be there for 40 years. We see the little section of the map here of them, the red line heading up into the Negev and then having to turn around and come back to Kadesh Barnea there. This is an important incident in the history of Israel, and it's mentioned a number of times later, which emphasizes the importance of this. It's mentioned later on in the book of Numbers in chapter 32, verses 6 to 15. This is when the people this is again, it's at the end of the period of 40 years in the wilderness when the people are close to entering the land, and the tribes of Reuben and Gad, they want to stay on the eastern side of the Jordan. It's good land there, and they say, we want to stay here for our cattle. We don't want to cross over the Jordan, but we're happy to stay here. And Moses, this is Moses' reaction to that request in Numbers chapter 32, verse 6. But Moses said to the sons of Gad and to the sons of Reuben, "Shall your brethren go to the war while you sit here? Why will you discourage the heart of the people of Israel from going over into the land which the Lord has given them? Thus did your fathers when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. For when they went up to the valley of Eshcol and saw the land, they discouraged the heart of the people of Israel from going into the land which the Lord had given them. And the Lord's anger was kindled on that day, and he swore, saying, Surely none of the men who came up out of Egypt from 20 years old and upward shall see the land which I swore to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, because they have not wholly followed me, none except Caleb the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, and Joshua the son of Nun, for they have wholly followed the Lord. And the Lord's anger was kindled against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness 40 years, until all the generation that had done evil in the sight of the Lord was consumed. And behold, you have risen in your father's stead a brood of sinful men to increase still more the fierce anger of the Lord against Israel. For if you turn away from following him, he will again abandon them in the wilderness, and you will destroy all this people. So Moses was concerned here that history is repeating itself here, that Reuben and Gad don't want to go into the land. But Moses had misjudged the situation there, really, and the Reubenites and the Gadites say, well, they will go into the land, they will help the rest of Israel settle the land and conquer the land, and then they will come back out and they will settle in that land that they wanted to settle on the eastern side of the Jordan. But we see how concerned Moses was about all of this, that he was afraid that things were going to repeat themselves again 40 years later and they would not want to go into the land again. Well, again, in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 1, verses 19 to 46, we won't read the whole passage here, but again, this is Moses' speech as the people are on the verge of entry into the land, and he recalls, reminds the people of those events and recalls all of those events that had happened there. And then in the book of Nehemiah, in Nehemiah chapter 9, verses 16 and 17, which is a record of a prayer, Ezra's prayer, when the people, this is like 1,000 years later, but they're still thinking about this. Ezra still has this event on his mind in this prayer in Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 16, where Nehemiah Ezra rather is recalling the events of Israel's history. He says, "But they and our fathers acted presumptuously and stiffened their neck and did not obey thy commandments. They refused to obey and were not mindful of the wonders which thou didst perform among them. For they stiffened their neck and appointed a leader to return to their bondage in Egypt. But thou art a God ready to forgive, gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, and didst not forsake them." So he's emphasizing there God's willingness to forgive them, even though they had talked about going back to Egypt. Then in verse 21 of that prayer as well, he mentions 40 years didst thou sustain them in the wilderness, and they lacked nothing. Their clothes did not wear out, and their feet did not swell. So he's thinking there of the gracious provision that God made for the people during that 40-year time, that although that was their punishment, God was still gracious towards them and provided for them. And then in some of the Psalms, reference to this, Psalm 95. Psalm 95, verses 10 and 11. God is the speaker here. "For 40 years I loathed that generation and said, they are a people who err in heart, and they do not regard my ways. Therefore I swore in my anger that they should not enter my rest." So God in the psalm there making reference to that event as well. And Psalm 106, verses 24 to 27. Then they despised the pleasant land, having no faith in his promise. They murmured in their tents and did not obey the voice of the Lord. Therefore he raised his hand and swore to them that he would make them fall in the wilderness and would disperse their descendants among the nations, scattering them over the lands. So again, there that reference to them falling in the wilderness there. Then in the New Testament, in Hebrews chapter 3. The writer here is quoting from that psalm, Psalm 95 that we looked at a moment ago, making reference to that psalm. Hebrews 3, verse 12. "Take care, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God. But exhort one another every day, as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. For we share in Christ, if only we hold our first confidence firm to the end. While it is said, today when you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. Who were they that heard and yet were rebellious? Was it not all those who left Egypt under the leadership of Moses? And with whom was he provoked 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they should never enter his rest, but to those who were disobedient? So we see that they were unable to enter because of unbelief. Therefore, while the promise of entering his rest remains, let us fear lest any of you be judged to have failed to reach it." So the writer there is using that incident as a warning for his own readers, for Christians, not to be rebellious as the Israelites had been, and so be excluded from entry into God's rest. That we have to keep going, we have to remain faithful so that we too can enter the rest, the true rest that God has provided and planned for us. So a lesson for us to learn from the unfaithfulness and the rebellion of the Israelites against God here. Okay, we'll invite